When the town was shifted, I was 13 years of age, and we had our schoolmates. There was a fair bit of mischief used to happen at the school at times too, but you wouldn't get away with it today. But the headmasters had control of you in those days with their straps and their 3-foot rules. You'd cop that over the backside over a table if you got into trouble, and there was certain times when we certainly did for one reason or another.
No, I do remember for a dare being upstairs with my sister and a friend, and they said they dared me to lock a bedroom door. The key was in the outside of the door, and of course I took the dare and dashed over and turned the key on the lock, and it actually turned out to be the magistrate that was staying there, the police magistrate, and he was locked in his room, and we heard him trying the door, and we all ran away. So I don't know, I didn't get into trouble over that. I'm sure I should have, but I didn't. I don't think anyone actually confessed. I certainly didn't. But the magistrate eventually was let out. Someone heard him banging on the door.
I had an uncle once that won a £5 bet, rode his horse into the bar of the Tallangatta Hotel and wrestled it to the floor.
I remember one day it was pet day at school, and Bev Stewart was a trainee teacher there at 16 years old. I had no pets, so I went up the hill at the back of the school looking for lizards to take down, and the first rock I came to, there was a group of young snakes underneath it, so I bagged them up in the bag, took them down to the pet day in the classroom it was, and someone knocked the bag over, and away went the snakes, and away went Bev out the door. And from all through the week, a little snake had come flying out from under the cupboard, and Bev would go out the door again.
Well, I've forgiven Jock Cavanagh for chasing me with a bag of snakes.
There was another fellow that came every summer, Felix Grundy. He was a snake catcher, and he used to catch snakes to take to the zoos in Melbourne for anti-venin and of course stock for their zoos. And Felix, after a hot day out running around the paddocks chasing snakes, loved to drink. So he got into the pub one night and he'd had a fair skinful, and Ray the barman refused to serve him. So he said, well, he went back out to his bus and he came back in with a bag full of snakes. And he said, well, are you going to give me a drink? And he said, no. He says, you've had too much. So he tipped the snakes out. Well, there was a heck of a scramble as people went out doors and windows in all directions, and he had no trouble getting a drink. There was plenty of them around, and he didn't have to pay for them. So Snowy was known as having a fairly tight purse string. One evening, the Catholic priest called in, ordered a meat pie, and Snowy reminded him that it was Friday and he didn't think you ate meat of a Friday, to which the priest quipped back. He said, that's why I came to you, Snowy. He says, they say there's no meat in your pies.
I used to haunt the rubbish tip up past the cemetery there and get medicine bottles and bring them home, wash them, clean them up, and take them down to the local chemist where they'd recycle them. You wouldn't be allowed to do that these days. I used to get 6pence for the little bottles, and the bigger APC bottles, they were called, they were only worth 3pence, but the little ones were very valuable.
There was a regular two-up game was held at the Victoria Hotel mostly, and in that very illegal game, but they used to hold it in the back of the Victoria Hotel late in the day and the evening, and the detectives from Melbourne used to often raid the place, so they'd have a cockatoo, or a lookout if you like, up on the veranda out the front. One evening he come running down, they're coming. So there was a heck of a scramble, and Alan in particular, he ran up the stairs. He was going to get away. As soon as they disappeared inside, he slid down the downpipe and tore his backside out of his trousers, and had to explain that when he got home. But Claude was the money man, and he scooped the money into a bag and tore off out the back door and down the paddock. And Jack the plumber had been down to milk his cow, and he was coming back up with a bucket full of milk. So Claude ran past Jack and threw the bag in the bucket and said, look after that, Jack, I'll see you in the morning. After it was all settled down, Claude did go around to Jack in the morning and say, gee, thanks for helping us out, Jack. He said, look, if I can just grab that money, I'll get out of your road. To which Jack looked at him very puzzled and said, what money was that, Claude? Were you saying money? So Then I think the argument started then, but it all ended up all right. They had a laugh about it eventually. But a horse found its way onto the viaduct, and late one evening the train coming through cleaned it up, killed it, and they called the pound man, and the man that ran the pound, and he found the horse and it had its head cut off with the train. But he thought he knew whose it was, so he got in touch with the fellow to come and identify his horse. Well, the bloke come along knowing full well that he was going to cop a fair fine for having his horse loose. And he looked at the horse and said, no. He said, that's definitely not my horse. And the pound keeper looked at him and said, well, how do you know it's not your horse? He said, nah. He said, my horse definitely had a head.
For entertainment, there was the bridge over the creek that sort of separated the town, the road that way. We used to get a box and wrap it up into a nice, attractive sort of a parcel and put it out in the middle of the road with a string attached to it. And along had come someone on a bike or walking or in a car even. Oh, what's that? And they'd stop, and just as they were about to pick it up, we'd give the string a pull. Well, we got into a fair bit of trouble for that. One day, one bloke there was quite irate. He said, I ought to come down there and fix you blokes. And one of the smart fellas said, why don't you? Well, with that, he jumped the fence and after us, and yeah.
A policeman came to the school one day, and he'd heard rumours from the telegraph people that a lot of the insulators on the posts were being broken somehow. And he says, I'm not too sure how that would happen. He said, maybe someone's been throwing stones. Of course, what were we doing? We were fairly competitive, and we'd see who could knock the insulators off the posts with a yonny. So we thought maybe we'd better give that one away.